Admitting. Hi, everyone. My name is Victoria Alexander, and I'm just going to wait a minute or two before we get started to let all the stragglers that didn't sign up right at 5 o'clock to get on their Zooms, and then we'll get started. So just give us a couple of minutes before we get started. I'm going to do some housekeeping. There is a chat button here at the bottom of the screen. You can ask any questions you want there throughout the presentation. We're gonna hold questions till the end. That's usually how it goes, unless we see a really good one that's relevant at the moment where we are in the process. And this isn't a sales pitch. This is just basic information, reviewing the process. Rashida and I have worked together for 11 or 12 years now at this point, because she was my lawyer when I bought my house. My first house, my investment property that I bought last year, she was also my lawyer. So we've been working together both for my personal use and professionally for a while. So then what else can I tell you? We'll be sharing relevant links throughout the presentation that you'll find useful for digging into some information that might help you figure out if now is the right time for you to sell, or any other questions that you might have. At the end of this, we're going to send out an email that has our seller's guide to Brooklyn, that has tons of resources about selling. And there are some calculators and other great items of value that hopefully you'll find useful. And if anybody wants to contact Rashida and I after this, we're happy to jump on a call to talk about your specific situation offline and not in front of other people, to help you figure out and navigate this process, because that is our job. Still, just let me look at the time here. It's 5:02. I'm going to wait a minute or two longer. If anybody wants to start ask questions now while we're waiting, you are more than welcome. Okay, I'm just going to get started. And again, hello, my name is Victoria Alexander. I'm the owner and principal broker of Realty Collective, a boutique real estate firm that I started 16 years ago to defy the stereotypes associated with real estate brokers. I do not work with developers. I do not work with investors. I only work with real people that, are trading property that is for their home, and small mom and pop landlords that inherited it as part of generational wealth. I basically see myself as your coach, your therapist, your guide and sounding board for guiding you through this emotional roller coaster of New York City real estate. When you're buying or selling, it is definitely stressful, and we do everything on our end to try to minimize the stress level of this experience for you. And one or two more people joining. Welcome. And we are just getting started. And now I'm going to introduce Rashida.
Hi, everyone. I'm glad to see more people are joining. My name is Rashida Sadiq. I am a real estate attorney. I've been practicing for going on 19 years in Brooklyn. I represent many sellers in these past couple of years. So I'm looking forward to giving you some guidance on what you should do to, from the legal standpoint in preparing yourself for selling your property. I'm licensed in both New York and New Jersey. And look forward to participating this afternoon.
Thanks, Rashida. So again, after this presentation, we will be receiving our home sellers guidebook. It's a handbook and guide to selling property here in New York. And just make sure we have your registered email that you would like us to send that to, and it comes through MailChimp. So just make sure you also check your spam box for that for that resource. So why sell now? Because you might want to be upgrading to a better space. You've been stuck in your apartment during COVID, and you realize that there are some amenities that you would really like in your space. You've owned for a while, and you're just ready to upgrade to a nicer space. Your property is high in demand right now, and you could cash out on that opportunity. You might have outdoor space or 3 or 4 bedrooms. Those are properties that are hard to find. And you might realize there's an opportunity, especially maybe you're an empty nester or somebody that doesn't need so much space right now. Or you want to sell because you're ready to move out of New York City, move upstate, or get a pied-à-terre and move out of the city just temporarily. So those are some reasons that you would sell. And just that demand is really high right now. The market is really strong, and it would be a good time to sell because interest rates are really low for buyers, and there's a lot of buyers in the market. So you're positioning yourself to sell right now in a really strong market. Next slide, and things that you should consider when thinking about selling. The market has changed in the past few months, encouraging vaccine news and COVID rates and the weather, the economy rebounding. Sort of life is going back to normalcy. So families are returning to the city, and inventory has been held off the market for a while. So there's a supply and demand that's driving a little bit of a seller's market. It was at the height of it earlier this spring. There's still a lot of buyers in the market, and not enough inventory. So I still think that we're in a seller's market. So it'd be a good time to list your property for those reasons. And there was a lull for a really long time. There was not a lot of sales and transactions in all of 2020. And we're really seeing a rebound from that. Up until January, February, we were in a very, very strong buyer's market. Buyers really had the upper hand. There was low interest rates and a lot of inventory that wasn't moving off the market because there just wasn't that confidence in the market yet either. There's something, have you held your property? Something to consider is if you've held your property long enough. We have this scenario that we call the break-even horizon, where it depends on what your closing costs when you purchased and what your closing costs will be when you sell, and how long you've held your property. Are there any flip taxes or transfer taxes that come with your property when you're selling it? And if you've seen that property has appreciated in over those 5 years, at least 5 years, and now would be a good time to break out. So the opportunity costs are something you really need to take into consideration when you're thinking about selling. You don't want to be selling at a loss unless you absolutely have to. If you own a co-op and you're not allowed to rent it out and you're planning on moving to California, your sort of hands are tied. So these are all things just to think about when you're considering putting your property on the market. Generally, sellers have 7 to 8% closing costs. And Rashida, do you want to talk about the closing costs that are associated with selling from your perspective?
Definitely. I would say for the seller, first of all, you have New York City and New York State transfer taxes. I tell clients that when you bought your property, the city took money, and when you're selling it, the city takes money. So you have your New York City and New York State transfer taxes, which is based on a percentage of the price. So it's either 1% if it's under 500, 1.425% if it's above. That's for New York City. If you're in the other boroughs, you're in like Suffolk or Nassau County or anything like that, it goes down. There's only New York State transfer taxes, and that's 0.4%. So that right there, you have to pay your transfer taxes. Other things, if you haven't been living in New York and you're selling your property, so you moved maybe a year ago and now you're looking to move to sell, there's non-resident estimated income tax that you also have to consider. Your attorney, you can definitely do a calculation because based on what you originally purchased the property at and what you're selling the property at and all of your closing costs and improvements. So that's one thing if you're not a resident of New York that you have to think about as well. Victoria had mentioned a flip tax if you're selling a co-op. Some co-ops have a flip tax, which is a percentage of the selling price that they charge, or some based on the number of shares that you own. Obviously, you have to you pay off any mortgages or home equity lines you have on the property. If you have any open water, open real estate taxes that have to be paid off, legal fee as well, and realtor commission. So those are generally your kind of main items that you have when you're selling a property. Aside from that, you also have to think about capital gains. If this was your primary residence, capital gains you don't pay until you do your taxes, which is typically the following year. But you do also want to think about that because if you've lived in the property for a certain amount of years, you may have an exemption. Or if you haven't, then you may have, you bought it for 100,000 and now you're selling it for 600,000. You're going to have potential capital gains there that you want to think about as well. So those are the main items that when you're selling as far as closing costs to consider.
How many years do I have to live in my house to not pay for capital gains?
So two out of if you lived in the property as your primary residence 2 out of the last 5 years, then you have an exemption. It's 250,000 for a single person, 500,000 for a married person. So if it's two individuals on the deed, then each person gets 250,000 exemption. Anything above that would be subject to capital gains. Now, anything above depends on if it's long-term capital gains or short-term capital gains. But you do have an exemption if it was your primary residence and you lived there 2 out of the last 5 years. If you didn't and it's been investment property, there's other things that you can do to try to minimize your capital gains, such as a 1031 exchange, which is investment property, selling investment property and buying another investment property within a certain time period.
I feel like a lot of people are trying to take advantage of that right now. They're in Red Hook right now too. We also have opportunity zones, which people are interested in taking advantage for the tax shelters. So if you guys have questions about capital gains or 1031 tax exchanges, that just follow up with us. They're a little bit complicated, but we're happy to dig deeper into them. So next slide, do you have a property that people are looking for? So people are really looking for, especially post-COVID, turnkey properties. They want the space to be ready to move into right away. They don't want to do renovations. Do you have desirable amenities like outdoor space, washer, dryer, dishwasher? Is the location close to the park? Are you close to a lot of trains? Some people are going back to the office. So thinking about that location, do you have space to work from home? That's a high in demand right now. Even if it's just a little corner that you can cut out and put in a desk that's not staring at a wall, people are really interested in having extra space so they don't have to go into the office. Are you, ready to move out, or do you need to have somebody wait for a while? People want to start the school year in September, with their kids settled and not be uprooting them in the middle of the school year. Do you have outdoor space? Are you in a good school district? Do you have a multifamily versus a single family home? Do you have parking? Parking is really high in demand right now. I'm sure people are very aware of how hard parking is because everybody in COVID got a car for some reason so that they can drive wherever and not have to be near any other people. Everybody wants to drive out to the country and be in nature. So next slide, have you had your property long enough? So we always like to say there's a 5-year hold period, and you might get away with doing less. Some cases you have to do more just because there's that closing costs on the buy side and the sell side. So you have to overcome your appreciation needs to excel the opportunity costs that you invested in the property, as well as any investments that you made, upgrades, renovations into the space. Here we just go over a little bit what Rashida just went over: the capital gains, realtor commission, mortgage payoff, flip tax, transfer taxes. These are things that just consider if you have to, that would be part of your closing costs on the sell side. Next slide. The other thing you need to have when you're thinking about selling is a plan. Where are you going? You really want to capitalize on the sale because the market's really great for your property. But where are you going to go? Are you going to rent? Are you going to buy? Do you have financing in place so that you can buy something else or working with a bank that can create that opportunity for you? What's your timeline? And do you have a bottom line in mind? Everybody's telling you it's worth a lot more, but do you have okay, I need $1 million or I'm not going to sell that? We might not be able to get you $1 million, and we're going to have a very frank conversation about what the market looks like for your type of property. And you want to really try to avoid seller's remorse. Do you have something great that's going to be hard to replicate or replace for you? If you have a diamond in the rough, maybe not getting rid of it is renting it out if it's a condo or a multifamily house and coming back to it. Next slide. So you've decided to sell. Next slide. You need to assemble your team. The 2 people you really need to have right out the gate are your attorney, and that's Rashida, and a real estate broker. If you have never bought and sold for yourself and you don't have any real estate experience, these are the 2 people you have to have for New York City to make sure they're looking out for your vested interests. As I have a fiduciary responsibility to my sellers to make sure I'm always looking out for them and getting them the best deal. I am very protective and I'm aggressively protective of them. And, we'll fight tooth and nail to make sure that your interests and your goals are met. Next, so you've decided that no. Considerations as we're navigating COVID challenges, understanding your neighborhood and the home and the asset of the sale. You need to know your property type, call and interview people and know that they can see if they can rep your property. Things to ask an agent when you're interviewing. How available are you? Do you have a team of people that can step in? How many listings are you representing right now? One of the biggest challenges with COVID that I found with all the other professionals that work with me is that some of them just were not prepared for the amount of work that came out of COVID. And that there was just lawyers and other brokers that didn't have team members to help them get through the work. They were just inundated with too much work and they couldn't handle it. And so they kept on taking on clients and then they were underserving their clients. So make sure that when you're vetting people, that they have the bandwidth to actually take on your project and that they are not going to be overwhelmed and they're going to give you the attention and service that you need and deserve. It's very important. And then figuring out who your buyer is. It's usually you, several years when you first bought your property. So if you were a couple and when you purchased and then you had a bunch of kids and now you've grown out of the space, you're probably going to sell to a couple that's an early family just starting out. And so just think about the things that you wanted when you were looking for a home back then. Those are considerations. Work with someone who understands your neighborhood, work well with people who enjoy working with a small company. If you want personalized service, make sure you find a person who can fulfill that need. Property needs to tell a consistent story and not a problematic or troublesome one. So you want to make sure you work with somebody that can help you point out the things that need to be addressed, fix any material problems or factor into your purchase price, that those things need to be addressed for your buyer. And beware of virtual staging. I can't say it enough that buyers end up being disappointed when they come into a space and they don't see any furniture there and they have a hard time visualizing it. I always encourage to actually do real staging if the apartment is not filled with your things. And then talk to an attorney first and thinking about addressing any of these problems. If you're in a building that has challenges, some of these challenges, Rashida, could be building doesn't have great financing. Is there ways to overcome that? What are some challenges that you need to think ahead for that you might have to overcome if you have a problematic property?
So one, I'll first touch on our houses. So if you have a house and you're looking to sell your house, first thing I tell clients is do a check, make sure if there's any violations on your properties. A lot of times years ago, individuals would buy properties with open violations and get a credit for it. And now you're looking to sell and you never address that violation. And now it's going to come up again. So you want to look to see if there's any open violations on the property, any sidewalk violations or notices you may have gotten if you own a house. Also, if you did any work to the property, did you hire someone? Did they get a contractor? Did they file all of the paperwork with the Department of Buildings? So now you're looking for any open permits, any open alterations, because all of that has to be cleared up prior to your closing as well. It can hold up your closing. Secondly, get together all your documents, such as not necessarily your deed, because your attorney can always pull that up on Acris, which is the system. However, if you have your old owner's policy, which is your insurance policy for the property when you purchased it, have that handy. Do you have the survey from when you bought the property, which is a diagram of the property? Have that handy, because all of these things, when you go to sell, these help you address any potential title issues that may come up, and also assists the buyer to get the title searches and insurance done pretty quickly as well. So gather all of those documents, your owner's policy, your survey. Also, if you're thinking about capital gains and things like that, because you're a non-resident or you're not, gather all of your receipts and your closing statement from when you purchased the property, because all of that you're going to need now that you're selling. Also for tax purposes, you're going to need that for when you're selling as well. So that's for a house. If you're looking at a co-op, You want to gather a copy of your stock certificate, a copy of your proprietary lease. If you have a mortgage, the bank probably has your original documents. So all you really need is the copies. And obviously make sure that you have your mortgage information, because your attorney is going to have to order and have those original documents gotten to you, delivered at a closing. If you don't have the mortgage on the property and you have a co-op, you want to make sure that you have your original document, which is your stock certificate and lease. I had a client that was selling a co-op. He paid off the mortgage, a couple of years prior to him selling, and the bank is supposed to send him those original documents. The bank never did, or they did and he lost it, and now he's selling. So we had to make sure that, we have enough time to get either some co-ops require a bond, which can be expensive, or some just have an affidavit. So you always want to co-op, get your stock certificate, get your lease if you don't have a mortgage. And if you have a mortgage, get copies of that so you can give that to your attorney. Condos and houses are kind of the similar, always looking for violations, always looking for any open permits. Even with a co-op, if you did some work, you combined units or you redid the, bathroom and you moved, added a room or things like that, always make sure that you have any of the paperwork that your work was approved by the co-op or by the condominium, because all of that assists, especially when an attorney is doing due diligence as a buyer. They want to know, was there any work done to the property? Was there any alterations? And was it approved by the board in order to get that done? And if it was approved, was the necessary paperwork provided to the Department of Buildings to make sure that it passed inspections and things like that?
Yeah, having your offering plan, having any amendments, the building, if you have access to the building financials, knowing your taxes. If it's a condo, when we advertise the property, we want to disclose any assessments, any flip taxes, common charges, amount of shares. If you know the square footage of your property for a condo or a house, it's always great as well. So the more information we can disclose ahead of time, that's going to help somebody make an educated decision about purchasing your property, and let the due diligence process for lawyers go a lot smoother. So gathering up as much as that as possible is really helpful for everybody involved. Okay, next slide. Soliciting buyers. Okay, next slide. So what story are you telling? I think I mentioned a little bit earlier about who you're selling to, understanding your target market and how to advertise and speak to them. Can the broker that's representing your property sell your property? I don't take any listings in Manhattan. I'm not going to sell anything in Queens. Probably not going to sell anything in Bensonhurst, Bay Ridge, Canarsie. I don't know that inventory. I don't know those neighborhoods well enough to feel confident that I could sell it. I'm really good at selling things that are in the downtown Brooklyn, Cobble Hill, Carroll Gardens, Park Slope areas, because I'm very familiar. I've done a lot of transactions there. I understand the quality of life there and why the buyers are interested in moving there. So that's a type of property that I feel confident in. Make sure that you're picking somebody that is relatable and understands the product. You're more likely to buy a product from somebody that likes and appreciates it rather than somebody that doesn't understand it and can't speak to it. So just make sure you're interviewing these people and you're feeling confident that they can speak to the buyers about the values of the apartment that you love so much. And that's why I always ask people, why do you like your apartment? Tell me the good things about this. Tell me the bad things about it. A note on staging is that, like I said before, virtual staging, in my mind, it's a no-no. It's a way to cut corners. So if you've already moved out of the property, we definitely have to consider doing staging. We can include staging in our commission rates, and there's no out-of-pocket cost to our sellers. We also do some renovations too. We have relationships with contractors, and we facilitate, upgrading cabinets and painting. We sold a place on St. Mark's this spring that had green and red walls that we had a painter come in and paint everything white because it just was too distracting. And I knew that it was not going to get the top dollar that we wanted to get for our sellers without doing that. And thankfully it worked. And we had a bidding war and, sold way over asking because that was the market we were in back in April and May. I think next slide. And we're going to talk about considering offers. Next slide. And what you should look for. For me, I always tell everybody, we always counter an offer. take your first offer seriously. Just because of the first one and it's exciting, don't think that you're going to get 5 more. You might not get any more. So this person has been in the market looking for your property. They're eager, they're ready to go. Don't discount their eagerness and the price that they're giving you because they're the first one. A lot of people do that, and I think it's a mistake. And then put some COVID concerns into your contract. Rashida can speak to that a little bit. I always say the thing that you need to do with like co-ops is Google whoever is applying to you, because some co-op boards, not so much in Brooklyn, but in Manhattan specifically, are challenging. They're not going to take people if they Google them and say, that they have massive dinner parties and that's going to be loud and destructive. It's just, you want to make sure the board's going to look at their finances and approve them. Are they skirting under the wire and only putting 10% down? Do they have enough reserves? You really want to scrutinize this person as being somebody that's joining the community you're leaving. And is that community going to accept them? You don't want to accept somebody. They go through this whole process, put their co-op package together, get them in front of the board, and then the board rejects them. So vetting those offers ahead of time is super important. Rashida, do you want to talk about COVID concerns and anything you put in the contract and what to do when considering offers that come in for sales?
So, thankfully now it seems like a lot of we've kind of learned how to adjust with, the contracts and adjusting the closing dates and things like that. So even now, some of the provisions that we did regarding the time period extensions are now being resolved, because now we put in language regarding remote closings, sending wires versus having to have a checks. Before it was only either bank checks were allowed or for closings, but now they're allowing wires. So as I said, now we've been putting in that if all the parties are agreeable, you can do a remote closing. Also that wires can be given for the down payment and for the closing, et cetera. So that's some of the new provisions that we have in there. Timing wise, the main thing that I say was really about the closing. Closings were delayed a lot during the beginning. We were still able to do closings, but they were delayed as far as trying to get everyone to the table or even remotely. And also because you weren't able to move in or move out of buildings if it was a co-op or a condo. So now the closings in New York are typically on or about closing dates. So you do have a grace period in there, but we still put in provisions that if for some reason the closing is delayed as a result of a reason related to COVID, that you have a tolling of the time period, which means that it stops and then it reinstitutes the time periods once that issue is resolved. We've put in there also that it's resolved for given another 30 or 60-day time period to close. So that's kind of some of the items that we've added in regarding the contract of sale.
Thanks. Next slide. I think you went over this: current deed, stock lease violations, owner's policy, survey. Those are the documents we need. Next slide.
Definitely.
Yeah. Next slide. Scheduling power of attorneys, vacating the premises, walkthrough. Well, I think you talked a little bit about the challenges of scheduling. Anything else you want to add?
Yes. So power of attorneys, actually recently they're just passed a new power of attorney rules that just went into effect as of July 13th. So if you're selling and you're going to give your attorney power of attorney, they've now required that there's 2 witnesses to the power of attorneys. So it's a little bit more complicated to execute it. So I've been having clients, if you're planning on leaving when you're selling, you probably want to have your attorney to give your attorney a power of attorney prior to leaving the state, because you want to make sure that it's executed properly, that you're able to go to their office and make sure that there's witnesses, because being kind of executed similar to a will, versus where you would just need to go to notary yourself and get it signed and sent back. So now you need 2 witnesses plus your notary to do the power of attorney. The notary can also serve as one of the witnesses, but you generally want to have 2 separate witnesses and the notary. So now there's 3 parties. But you can give your attorney power of attorney to do closings as a seller. Typically, your part is roughly 20 to 30 minutes, if that longs and you're sitting there watching the buyer sign a bunch of documents and waiting around. So you don't necessarily have to attend the closing if you don't want to. You can also schedule with your attorney if you're still in state to pre-sign documents if it's closer to the closing date. Scheduling is, I say it's a juggling match. It's, trying to get everyone, 10 different parties on the same day, on the same time. And it can be as very, very trying and, with getting everyone together, but that's the role of your attorney to hopefully shuffle it around and get everyone to your closing. Closing dates, scheduling can be delayed. Even now, even though we're still, we're getting back to some, some get into closing in person, it's a matter, it can take up to 2 weeks to schedule a closing. Some management companies are still working remotely. So if you're looking at a co-op or a condo, it can even take longer because now you have to get them certain documents in advance and they won't even schedule the closing prior to them getting those documents, and just preparing those documents and getting to them because they have to be signed and notarized can be about a week or so. Vacating the premises. Very important. Contract provides that your property will be delivered vacant and broom clean on the day of the closing, and really for your walkthrough, because the buyer is going to do the walkthrough at least 24 to 48 hours prior to closing. So if that means you have to leave and get out of the property prior to your closing date. If you need the funds to, from your sale in order to purchase something or to move, you have to have that discussion with your attorney, because that means there may be what we call post-possession, and that has to be a language that has to be included in the contract of sale. Closings typically take roughly 60 days for a house or a condo, 90 days more sometimes for a co-op. So you want to also take that into consideration when you're thinking about vacating the premises. And definitely, as I said, it's something you want to discuss as well.
So the other thing is utilities. You don't want to turn off the utilities before the final walkthrough. This happened in a deal I did recently where we were very concerned because the seller was like, I turned everything off. And we were worried when we were going to go there that we were going to have gas and electric to try all the appliances, because at the final walkthrough, the buyer comes to make sure that you're delivering the property in the condition that it was promised to them. So that means all the appliances need to be working, the water needs to be on. And if something's not working, Rashida's not going to be happy, because then there needs to be money in escrow or a credit given, and then it's an extra complication. And then her job extends past the closing, which I know she finds very frustrating. So do you want to talk about what happens if there are issues, Rashida?
So the bane of all attorneys is escrow, because everyone has gotten their check and there's no incentive to get things done after the closing. And as an attorney, now we're stuck with money in our account. Typically, maybe it's, $500, $1,000, which, $2,000, which is, and we're fighting, and it's not getting resolved in a timely fashion. So we typically, now we're actually instituting a policy, and I think most attorneys are doing that now, because that if there's going to be any escrows, that there's an additional retainer that has to be given, and that also that if it's not resolved within a certain time period, we're going to deposit it into court and let the parties haggle over it, because it's just, it's best to do your walkthrough. As I said, I'd like that you do it within 24 to 48 hours, because if there's issues that can be resolved, such as getting a credit, we can find out what the cost of something is to repair, or it can get repaired within that time period. You avoid escrows. Escrows are typically the last resort, and escrow means that a certain amount is held back to address that issue. So if you think it's going to cost, $2,000 to remedy, that $2,000 is held back by the seller's attorney until the item is either repaired, utilities are turned on, and then once it's confirmed by the buyer that it's been resolved, then they can release the funds to you. As a seller, you don't want that, because that means your money is held up. I have a situation right now with a seller that, we tried to tell him, get out of the property, make sure everything is vacant. He wanted to close. We closed, we put money in escrow. And now, the buyers are being very picky about, oh, this isn't working. This isn't working. Even though they did a walkthrough, but they do another walkthrough when you're finally out, and I can't release it. Even if I disagree with their with what they're saying. But until they give me the okay, I can't release it. And as a seller, your attorney can't release it until it's agreed upon, and that's your money that's held up. So as a seller, definitely best object is hopefully make sure everything's working, everything's turned on. So go once again and make sure that prior to you're doing that walkthrough. And then also, hopefully you can deliver the property vacant, but worst case, if you can't, during your post-possession, once again, make sure that everything's working. So when you turn it off, so when you turn over the keys, you're got your money and you're done with it. Nothing else survives closing.
That is so frustrating. I'm so sorry. What a stubborn seller. I couldn't imagine having to be in that position, that people just like, oh, want to rush to the closing table. But if you can't, like, you really want it to be the last thing and be able to walk away and be closing the chapter on that situation. Just dragging it out like that is not in anybody's benefit. And that's when emotions start to get in the way as well. Next slide on closing the deal. I think that is it. I don't have anything else except for that we're going to send out our sellers resource guide after this. So make sure you look for the email. And again, Rashida and I are available to talk if you want to talk privately about the property you're considering selling. And if it's outside of Brooklyn, I'm happy to refer, pick my brain, talk to me. I can refer you to another broker that I like and trust and that will handle things to the standard that I would. But thank you so much, everybody. Is there any final questions before we sign off? I didn't see any come through in the chat. Yep, I don't see any questions here, so I think we're just going to call it for the evening. Thank you guys, everybody, so much for joining, and hopefully we will talk to you soon.
Thank you. Have a great evening.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.